Chapter 1, The Chlorine Tide. The first thing I smelled wasn't the rain. It was the sharp, synthetic sting of swimming pool shock. I am a civil engineer. Specifically, I specialize in soil stability and urban drainage systems. My brain is wired to see the world in gradients, flow rates, and compaction ratios. To most people, a backyard is a place for a grill. To me, it's a managed watershed. And for the last 6 years, my managed watershed was the crown jewel of the Oak Creek subdivision. It was a Tuesday afternoon around 3:15 p.m. when the sky opened up. A standard summer downpour for this part of the state. But as I looked out my home office window, I saw something that violated the laws of physics. Water wasn't just trickling down the natural swale between my property and my neighbor's, it was surging. A localized tsunami of frothing, blue-tinted water was cresting over the timber retaining wall I'd installed 3 years ago. It wasn't a flood. It was a discharge. I didn't rush. I didn't scream. I reached into my desk drawer, pulled out a high-vis rain jacket, and grabbed my calibrated moisture meter and a clean glass masonry jar. I walked out into the deluge, my boots immediately sinking into the mulch of my prize-winning garden. The water was knee-deep in the low spots. My bloodgood maple, a tree I'd spent $4,000 on and 5 years pruning into a perfect canopy, was currently sitting in a pool of chemical-laden soup. I waded to the fence line. Through the slats of the cedar privacy fence Gary Sterling had installed last year. Without a permit, I suspected, I could see the source. A heavy-duty, 3-inch diameter discharge hose was snaked across his lawn, its nozzle shoved directly against the base of the fence. I took a water sample. I timed the flow rate using a fixed point on the fence. Then I walked to Gary's front door. I rang the bell. I waited 45 seconds. When Gary opened the door, he was holding a beer and wearing a "Life is Better" at the pool t-shirt. Gary is what I call a high-velocity narcissist. He moves fast, talks loud, and assumes everyone else is just an extra in the movie of his life.
"Arthur, hell of a storm, right?" He shouted over the rain. "Gary," I said, my voice flat, what my sister calls my deposition tone. "You are currently discharging approximately 150 gallons per minute of chlorinated pool water directly into my garden. You need to shut off the pump immediately." Gary blinked, then gave a dismissive wave of his hand. "Oh, that. Man, the pool was overflowing. The auto-leveler must have glitched. It's just an accident, buddy. Mother Nature's doing the heavy lifting anyway with this rain. It'll dilute. Don't be such a stickler."
"It is not diluting," I replied. "The chlorine concentration is high enough that I can smell it from 20 feet away. My maples are sensitive to pH shifts and chemical toxicity. Shut it off." "Look, I'll get to it when the rain lets up," Gary said, his tone shifting from fake friendly to irritated.
"It's my yard, Arthur. I can drain my pool how I want. Besides, your yard is downhill. Gravity isn't my fault. Maybe you should have built a better wall." He started to close the door.
"Gary," I said, stepping just close enough to keep the door from latching. I didn't look angry. I looked like a man reading a grocery list. "I am officially notifying you that your discharge is a violation of City Ordinance 1422 regarding illicit discharge into private property and the municipal storm system.
If you do not cease the pumping within 60 seconds, I will begin the documentation process for a formal civil tort." Gary laughed. It was a sharp, jagged sound. "Documentation? What are you gonna do, write a mean letter? Get off my porch, Arthur. It's an accident. Sue me if you're so bored."
He slammed the door. I stood there for a moment, letting the rain wash over my jacket. I didn't feel the urge to pound on the door. I didn't feel the need to yell. I felt a familiar, cold clarity. Gary had just provided me with the hubris variable I needed to complete the equation. I walked back to my yard. The pump was still humming. I pulled out my phone and checked my Nest camera feed. Then I looked up at the sky. High above, tucked under the eaves of my back porch, was my DJI Mavic 3 Pro. It was a professional-grade drone I used for site surveys. I walked back inside, sat at my computer, and opened a fresh Excel spreadsheet. Incident log, day 1. Start time, 15:15. Antagonist state, defiant, uncooperative. Material damage, soil saturation, chemical exposure, structural stress on retaining wall. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I had saved under specialists. Silas, I said when the line picked up. It's Arthur. I need a residential boundary survey, high precision, GPS coordinates, meets and bounds, the whole works. And Silas, bring the pins. I think we're going to be marking territory. The war hadn't started yet. This was just the discovery phase, and Gary Sterling had no idea how much data I was about to collect. Chapter 2, the $20,000 Maple. By Wednesday morning, the rain had stopped, but the devastation had just begun to reveal itself. In the world of high-end landscaping, there is a concept called replacement value. Most people see a tree and think it's worth the $40 they paid for a sapling at Home Depot. They are wrong. A 20-year-old Japanese maple, specifically a bloodgood or a seryu that has been professionally shaped, isn't just wood and leaves. It is an asset. It is a biological sculpture. I stood in my garden with Elias Vane. Elias looks like a man who spent his entire life in a forest because he mostly has. He is a board-certified master arborist and a forensic plant pathologist. He doesn't just look at trees, he audits them.
"Look at the leaf margins, Arthur," Elias said, kneeling in the soggy mulch. He pointed to the delicate, purple-red leaves of my prize bloodgood. The edges were already curling and turning a sickly, brittle brown. That's not water stress, that's chemical desiccation. Chlorine at that concentration acts like a salt. It draws the moisture out of the root cells via osmosis. You're literally dehydrating the tree from the inside out while it sits in a puddle. "Give it to me straight, Elias," I said, holding my clipboard. "Survival probability." For the bloodgood, low, maybe 30% with immediate soil flushing and charcoal amendments. The two smaller cereus, they're toast. They took the direct hit from the hose. Elias stood up and wiped his hands. "You want the appraisal for the court?"
Yes, use the guide for plant appraisal, 10th edition. I want full replacement cost, including the cost of a crane for installation, soil remediation, and the loss of aesthetic value to the property.
Elias whistled. "You're going for the throat. A tree this size, delivered and planted. You're looking at $20,000 to $25,000 per specimen, plus the removal of the dead ones." "Gary told me it was an accident," I said. "He told me to sue him if I was bored." "Well," Elias grinned, a rare and slightly terrifying sight. "I hope he has good insurance. Because I'm going to write a report that makes this look like a crime scene, which technically it is." After Elias left, I went into my office. It was time for the Level 1 warning.
In the cold justice playbook, the first move is never a lawsuit. It is a certified letter with return receipt requested. This is the legal equivalent of a flare across the bow. It establishes that the antagonist has been formally notified of the damage, destroying any future "I didn't know" or "it was an accident" defense. I drafted the letter with surgical precision. I didn't use emotional language. I didn't call him a jerk. I cited City Ordinance 1422. I cited the state's common enemy doctrine regarding surface water, which, crucially, does not apply to pumped pool water. I attached Elias Vane's preliminary assessment and a demand for $65,000 in damages to be paid within 14 days to avoid litigation. I drove to the post office, sent it certified, and kept the tracking number. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed.
It was a voicemail. I didn't pick up. Gray rock mode dictates that all communication must be documented and asynchronous. I played the message. "Arthur, you have got to be kidding me." Gary's voice was a mix of a bark and a whine. $65,000 for some bushes. Are you high? I told you it was an accident. The pump glitched. I'm not paying you a dime. You send me another one of these certified jokes and I'm calling my lawyer for harassment. Stay off my property, you freak.
I saved the audio file to 3 separate cloud drives. I also transcribed it. Evidence log 09:42 a.m. Subject A admits to the act but denies liability via glitch defense. Subject A displays aggressive, non-conciliatory behavior. I looked out my window. Gary was in his backyard, standing by his pool, gesturing wildly to a man in a polo shirt. I recognized the logo, Sterling Eco-Landscaping. It was Gary's own company. He was probably having his crew fix the drainage evidence. What Gary didn't realize was that I wasn't just looking at the trees anymore. I was looking at the way his pool deck sat against the fence. My engineer's eye noticed a slight, almost imperceptible tilt in the fence posts near his new construction. When you build an 80,000-gallon pool, you move a lot of earth. If you don't do it right, you shift the hydrostatic pressure of the entire slope. I picked up the phone. Silas, how's that survey coming?
I'm pulling the county records now, Arthur, Silas Thorne replied. Funny thing, your neighborhood was platted in '92. The original survey markers should be buried under the mulch near your fence, but looking at the satellite overlays, Gary's new pool deck looks awfully close to the line.
Like lawsuit close, how soon can you be here? I'm loading the total station into the truck now. See you in 20. I sat back and watched Gary on his patio. He was laughing again, clinking beer bottles with his foreman. He thought he had won because he'd shouted the loudest. He had no idea that the accident was about to become the least of his problems. Chapter 3, The Surveyor's Ghost. Silas Thorne is a man who believes that the truth isn't found in hearts or minds, but in the cold, unyielding mathematics of the Earth's crust.
He arrived at 11:00 a.m. with a tripod, a total station laser measuring device, and a ruggedized tablet that contained the digital DNA of our neighborhood. Property lines are the only objective truth we have left, Arthur, Silas said, adjusting his orange vest.
He began hammering a metal probe into the ground near the front corner of my lot. I watched from my porch, a cup of black coffee in my hand. Across the fence, I could see Gary. He had noticed Silas.
He was standing on his pool deck, hands on his hips, the universal pose of a man who feels his kingdom is being scrutinized. "Hey, what are you doing on my side?" Gary yelled. Silas didn't even look up.
I'm on Mr. Vance's property, sir. I'm locating the iron pins from the 1992 plat. There aren't any pins there. I put that fence in myself, Gary shouted, stepping closer to the fence line. You're trespassing with that laser thing. Sir, Silas said, finally looking up with a look of profound boredom. A laser beam cannot trespass, and if I don't find the pins where the map says they are, it usually means someone dug them up or built over them, both of which are Class B misdemeanors in this state. Would you like me to call the county surveyor to mediate? Gary sputtered and went back inside his house. He didn't come back out, but I could see the curtain in his kitchen window twitching.
For 2 hours, Silas worked. He moved with the precision of a surgeon. He mapped the front pins, then the rear, then ran a string line that represented the absolute legal boundary between my garden and Gary's pool. When he was done, he beckoned me over.
He was pointing at a spot about halfway down the fence line, right where the water had surged over my retaining wall. Here's your problem, Arthur, Silas said, pointing at his tablet screen. The screen showed a red line and a series of blue dots. The fence is on your property by about 3 inches. That's a standard whoopsie for most neighbors, but I prompted. But Silas slid his finger across the screen, showing the topographical overlay. Gary's pool deck, that expensive stamped concrete he's so proud of. It doesn't stop at the fence. The footer for that deck extends 4 inches past the fence line, which means he's poured approximately 6 tons of concrete onto your land. I felt a surge of cold satisfaction. He built over the line. Not just built, Silas corrected. He used your land as the structural support for his deck. And here's the kicker. Because he didn't want to pay for a proper drainage system on his own side, he graded the entire deck to slope toward the fence, toward you.
So the accident on Tuesday wasn't just a pump glitch, I mused. It was a design feature. His deck was flooding, and he used the pump to clear it out because the natural drainage he built was overflowing. Exactly. But there's something worse.
Silas led me to the retaining wall Gary had built to level his pool area. He kicked the base of the wood. He used landscape timber for a structural retaining wall. This stuff is rated for flower beds, not for holding back the weight of an 80,000-gallon pool.
And because he encroached on your side, he didn't leave enough setback for a proper gravel backfill. He's created a point of failure, I said, the engineer and me taking over. Arthur, that wall is bowing.
The pool water he dumped into your yard, it wasn't just to be a jerk. He was trying to relieve the pressure before his own wall collapsed. If he hadn't drained it, that pool deck would probably be sitting in your living room by now.
I looked at the fence. I looked at the bowing timber. I looked at my dying maples. Gary hadn't just been a bad neighbor. He had committed structural encroachment. In the world of real estate law, this is the nuclear option. You can't just fix a concrete footer that's 4 inches over the line. You have to demolish it. I need the certified survey report, Silas, I said, with the encroachment clearly marked in red.
And I want a separate letter stating the structural instability of the retaining wall due to the lack of proper setbacks. You got it. I'll have the digital copies to you tonight and the hard copies by messenger tomorrow.
As Silas packed up, I saw Gary come out again. He looked nervous now. He was holding a phone to his ear, pacing. I didn't say a word to him. I didn't wave the survey in his face. I simply walked back to my porch and picked up my phone. I called my sister, Marla. Marla, it's Arthur. I need you to prep a notice of encroachment and a demand for removal of encroaching structures. And Marla, check the local building codes for pool setbacks. I think Gary Sterling is about to learn why we hire engineers before we pour concrete. Gary thought the war was about $65,000 worth of trees. He didn't realize the real cost was going to be the pool itself. Chapter 4, Sterling's Strike. In the cold justice philosophy, we talk about Newton's third law. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. When you pressure a narcissist like Gary Sterling, he won't retreat. He will strike back. But because he is driven by ego rather than data, his strike will almost always be clumsy, emotional, and, ultimately, self-destructive. On Friday morning, I was finishing my second cup of coffee when a white SUV with City of Oak Creek, Building and Safety, emblazoned on the door pulled into my driveway. I didn't panic. I checked my home maintenance binder. I had every permit for every nail I'd ever driven into this house. The inspector was a man named Miller. He looked like he'd spent 30 years dealing with neighbors who hated each other, and he was tired of it.
Mr. Vance, Miller asked, holding a clipboard, we received a tip regarding a non-compliant structure on the rear of the property. Specifically, an unpermitted shed and a retaining wall that might be violating drainage codes.
I leaned against my porch railing. A tip, let me guess, my neighbor Gary Sterling. Miller sighed, his silence an eloquent confirmation. I'm just here to follow up, sir. Do you have the permits for the shed? I do, I said. I have the original permit from 1998 when the house was built, and the renewal permit from 2014 when I replaced the roof and siding on it. I also have the engineering sign-off for the retaining wall, which was inspected and closed out in July of 2021. Would you like to see the binder? Miller blinked. He wasn't used to people having binders. Most people had excuses. Actually, yes, Miller said. I brought the binder out. It was tabbed, indexed, and contained high-resolution photos of the construction process.
Miller flipped through it for 5 minutes, his expression shifting from bored to impressed. This is remarkably thorough, Mr. Vance. Everything is in order here. Your shed is 4 feet within the setback, and the wall has the required gravel backfill and weep holes. Miller closed the binder and looked toward the back of the lot. While I'm here, though, I couldn't help but notice the fence line. Funny you should mention that, I said, my voice as neutral as a dial tone. I actually had a licensed survey performed yesterday.
It turns out the fence isn't mine. It belongs to Mr. Sterling, and according to the survey, it's currently encroaching on my property by 3 inches. Miller's eyebrows went up. Is that so? And I continued, since you're the expert on drainage and safety, you might want to take a look at the retaining wall Mr. Sterling built to support his new pool. My surveyor, Silas Thorne, noted some significant bowing. And as a civil engineer myself, I'm concerned about the lack of a proper drainage plan, considering my yard was flooded by 20,000 gallons of his pool water just 3 days ago. Miller's face hardened.
Inspectors hate 2 things, being used as a weapon in a petty feud and unpermitted structural work that threatens public safety. Did he have a permit for that pool? Miller asked.
I haven't seen one posted, I said, and I noticed the crew he used was his own landscaping company. I wasn't aware Sterling Eco-Landscaping held a C-53 swimming pool contractor's license. Miller didn't say another word. He walked to the fence. He looked at the bowing timber. He looked at the stained, chemically burned grass in my yard. Then he looked at Gary's backyard. Gary was sitting on his patio watching us. He had a smug grin on his face, clearly thinking Miller was currently writing me a citation. He even gave a little mock wave. Miller didn't wave back. He walked to the gate and stepped into Gary's yard. I went back inside and watched through the window. I couldn't hear the conversation, but the body language was a masterclass in the backfire. Gary went from smug to confused, then from confused to shouting. He was pointing at me, then pointing at his pool. Miller was unmoved. Miller pulled out a yellow roll of tape, caution, unstricted area, and a red stack of forms. Gary's grin vanished.
He started pacing, his face turning a shade of purple that matched my dying maples. 10 minutes later, Miller walked back to his truck. He stopped by my porch. "Mr. Vance," Miller said, looking exhausted. "I've just issued a stop work order and a notice of violation for the property next door. There is no record of a permit for that pool, the deck, or the retaining wall. Furthermore, the wall is an immediate safety hazard. I've ordered him to drain the pool to 50% capacity immediately to relieve pressure on the wall." "That sounds serious," I said. "It is, especially since he's also in violation of the city's illicit discharge ordinance. I'll be filing a report with the Environmental Department regarding the chlorine runoff into your lot." Miller paused. "You wouldn't happen to have any footage of the discharge, would you? He's claiming it was a minor leak from a garden hose."
I pulled out my phone and opened the drone folder. I showed Miller a 30-second clip, 4K resolution, crystal clear. It showed Gary manually dragging a large discharge hose to the fence, the water gushing out like a fire hydrant, and Gary laughing as he did it.
Miller stared at the screen. "That doesn't look like a minor leak, Mr. Vance. That looks like willful negligence." "I can email you the file," I said. "Please do." As Miller drove away, Gary was standing at the fence. He wasn't laughing anymore. He was screaming.
You think you're smart, Vance. You think you can mess with my business. I'm going to make your life a living hell. You're dead, you hear me? Dead. I didn't respond. I didn't even look at him.
I simply picked up my moisture meter and went back to checking the soil pH near my maples. Phase 1 was over. The trigger had been pulled. Now it was time for Phase 2, the grind. Chapter 5, the paper wall. In the world of cold justice, there is a weapon more powerful than a police officer's badge or a judge's gavel. It is a piece of paper called a lease pendens. Latin for suit pending. A lease pendens is a formal notice filed with the county recorder's office. It publicly declares that the title to a specific piece of real estate is currently subject to a legal dispute. It doesn't take the house away, but it does something much more effective. It turns the property into financial toxic waste. On Monday morning, Marla called me. "The lease pendens is recorded, Arthur. Gary Sterling's house is now officially flagged. He can't sell it, he can't refinance it, and most importantly, he can't use it as collateral for any business loans." "Perfect timing," I said. I did some digging into Sterling Eco-Landscaping. Gary's been bragging on LinkedIn about a massive expansion into the commercial sector. He's been bidding on the new shopping center project downtown. And to win a contract that size, you need a massive line of credit. To get a line of credit, you need to prove your assets. Gary's primary asset is that quarter-acre lot and the house on it. So we just cut off his oxygen, exactly. Now we wait for the alarm to go off. The alarm went off at 4:30 p.m. I was in my front yard, carefully applying root stimulant to my surviving maples, when Gary's truck screeched into his driveway.
He didn't even park. He left the engine running and the door open. He came charging toward me, waving a crumpled piece of paper. "Vance, what the hell is this?" he roared. "I just got a call from my bank. My bridge loan was denied. They said there's a cloud on the title of my house. Did you do this?" I stood up, wiped my hands on a rag, and looked at him. I maintained gray rock status. Eyes neutral, posture relaxed, voice at a steady 60 decibels.
"I assume you're referring to the notice of encroachment and the pending litigation for property damage," I said. "Yes, my attorney filed the appropriate paperwork to protect my interests." "Protect your interests?" Gary was vibrating with rage.
"You're blocking my business. I have a $60,000 payroll due on Friday. I needed that loan to cover the startup costs for the downtown job. You're literally stealing food out of my employees' mouths."
"Gary," I said, "you chose to build a pool without permits. You chose to encroach 4 inches onto my property. You chose to discharge chlorinated water into a protected watershed. These are all Gary problems. I am simply documenting them.
I'll kill you. Gary stepped over the low stone border of my lawn. I'll burn this whole place down. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I simply pointed to the small, discreet black dome mounted on the corner of my garage.
That is a high-definition 4K camera with off-site cloud storage, I said. It has already recorded your threat. It has also recorded you trespassing on my property after receiving a formal cease and desist letter. If you take one more step, I will call the police and have you arrested for terroristic threatening. And I will add the footage to the evidence package for the permanent restraining order Marla is currently drafting. Gary stopped. His chest was heaving. He looked at the camera, then back at me. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something other than rage in his eyes. It was fear. The realization was finally sinking in. He wasn't in a shouting match. He was in a cage.
You're a monster, he hissed. No, I replied. I'm an engineer. I just like things to be built correctly. Your life, Gary, is currently structurally unsound. Gary turned and stormed back to his truck.
He backed out of the driveway so fast he clipped his own mailbox, sending it spinning into the street. He didn't stop to pick it up. I went back to my maples. That evening, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. Subject, regarding Gary Sterling. Body, I saw what happened with the inspector today. I used to work for Gary. I was the foreman on the pool job. He told us to skip the permits and the drainage because the neighbor is a pushover. I have copies of the original site plans he rejected because they were too expensive. Give me a call. I smiled. The specialist NPCs were starting to emerge. Gary thought the Lee's Pendens was the worst thing that could happen to him. He had no idea that his own past was about to come knocking on the door. I hit reply. Event density, 3-3 ending hook. A disgruntled former employee provides the internal data needed for the nuclear option. Chapter 6, The Unpermitted Truth. I met Mike Sullivan at a dimly lit diner 3 miles from the subdivision. Mike was the man who had sent the email, a veteran foreman with hands like cracked leather and a gaze that had seen enough corner cutting to build a circle. He didn't want coffee. He wanted to talk. Gary's a volume guy, Arthur, Mike said, sliding a thick manila envelope across the Formica table. He thinks if he moves enough dirt and signs enough contracts, the details won't catch up to him. But the pool job, that was personal. He wanted that oasis, and he wanted it done for 50 grand less than the engineering specs required. I opened the envelope. Inside were color-coded site plans, printouts of emails, and the original geological survey Gary had commissioned but never filed with the city. Look at page 4, Mike pointed with a blunt finger. That's the drainage plan drafted by the firm we usually sub out to. See those catch basins and the French drain system. Gary took one look at the $40,000 price tag for the invisible work and told me to bury the overflow pipe 6 inches under your fence line instead. He called it natural irrigation for your yard. I scanned the emails. One, dated 3 months ago, was from Gary to Mike. Sully, don't worry about the permit for the retaining wall. Vance is a nerd who spends all day looking at trees. He won't notice a few inches of encroachment. Just get the concrete poured before the next inspection cycle. He also skipped the soil compaction tests, Mike added. That pool is sitting on loose fill. With the amount of water he discharged into your lot, the ground under his own deck is liquefying. That's why the wall is bowing. It's not just a glitch, Arthur. The whole thing is a structural ticking time bomb. I felt the familiar, cold hum of data aligning. Gary hadn't just made a mistake, he had committed willful misconduct. He had knowingly bypassed safety regulations to save money, and he had documented his intent to violate my property rights in writing. Why are you giving me this, Mike? I asked. Because Gary didn't just screw you. He stiffed my crew on their last 2 bonuses because of unforeseen legal costs, meaning your certified letters. He's a parasite, Arthur. I want to be there when the host rejects him. I thanked Mike and took the envelope. When I got home, I didn't go to bed. I spent the next 4 hours scanning every document into my encrypted server. I then drafted a summary for Marla. Evidence log 2215. Internal documents secured. Subject A's intent to encroach and bypass permits is documented. Accident defense is now officially unsustainable. I looked out my window at the darkened yard next door. Gary's pool lights were on, casting a shimmering, artificial blue glow over the bowing fence. He probably felt safe, shielded by his lawyers and his accident story. He didn't realize that Mike had just handed me the blueprints to his destruction.
The next morning, I saw Gary at his mailbox. He looked haggard. The Lee's Pendens was clearly doing its work, strangling his cash flow. He caught my eye and tried to summon his usual bravado. "You think you're winning, Vance? My lawyer is going to eat you alive in the deposition next week."
Malicious prosecution, he calls it. You're going to end up paying for my pool by the time I'm done with you. I adjusted my glasses and gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod. I look forward to the deposition, Gary. It's always interesting to see how people justify their architecture under oath. Gary spat on the pavement and stomped back to his house. He didn't know that the nerd who looks at trees was currently holding the paper trail of his professional suicide. The trap was set. Now I just needed him to walk into the room and start talking. Chapter 7, The Bait and the Deposition. The deposition took place in a sterile, glass-walled conference room in downtown Oak Creek. Marla sat to my left, her suit as sharp as her legal mind. To my right sat the court reporter, her fingers poised over the stenotype machine like a predator waiting to strike. Gary arrived late, flanked by a lawyer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Gary was wearing an expensive suit that didn't quite hide the sweat stains under his arms. He was still leaning into the accident narrative. "Mr. Sterling," Marla began, her voice smooth and professional.
"Let's talk about the afternoon of Tuesday, July 12th. You've stated in your answer to the complaint that the discharge of pool water was an accidental equipment failure. Is that correct?" Gary leaned forward, projecting his chest. "That's right. The auto-leveler on the Hayward pump glitched because of the heavy rain. I had no idea it was even happening until Arthur came pounding on my door like a lunatic. And you were out of town that day, weren't you?" Marla asked, glancing at a sheet of paper. "Exactly," Gary said, gaining confidence. "I was in the city meeting with a developer. I didn't get home until almost 6. My crew can vouch for me. I was nowhere near that hose." I watched Gary's face.
He was lying with the practiced ease of a man who had spent his life talking his way out of trouble. He thought he was being clever. He thought the out-of-town alibi was his silver bullet. "I see," Marla said.
"So to be clear, under penalty of perjury, you are swearing that you did not manually activate the discharge pump, and you were not present on your property between 3:00 p.m. and 5:00 p.m. that day." "I swear it," Gary said, smirking at me. "I'm a busy man, Arthur. I don't have time to play with garden hoses." Marla paused. She looked at me, then back at Gary. This was the baiting maneuver. We had allowed him to construct an elaborate, documented lie. "Mr. Sterling," Marla continued, "are you familiar with the DJI Mavic 3 Pro drone?" Gary's smirk faltered. "What? Is that some kind of toy?" "It's a professional surveying tool," I said, speaking for the first time.
It has a 4.3 CMOS Hasselblad camera and can record in 5.1K resolution. It also has a home point return feature that records the entire flight path. Marla pulled a tablet from her briefcase and slid it across the table.
"We've entered this into evidence as Exhibit D. It's a 45-minute flight log from the afternoon of July 12th. The drone was hovering at 150 feet, performing a routine roof inspection of my client's property." Gary stared at the screen. Marla hit play.
The footage was crystalline. It showed the rain-slicked neighborhood from a bird's-eye view. At the 3:15 p.m. timestamp, a figure emerged from Gary's back door. It was Gary. He wasn't in the city. He was in his backyard wearing a yellow raincoat. The video showed him walking to the pump house. It showed him dragging the heavy discharge hose across the lawn. It showed him carefully wedging the nozzle into the gap under the fence, aimed directly at my Japanese maples. And then it showed him standing there for 5 minutes, watching the water surge into my yard before he turned and went back inside to grab a beer. The silence in the room was absolute. save for the rhythmic clicking of the court reporter's keys.
Gary's lawyer put his head in his hands. Gary's face turned a color I can only describe as ashen. That's not me, Gary stammered. That's someone else in my jacket. The resolution is 5.1K, Mr. Sterling, Marla said, her voice dropping an octave into executioner territory. We can see your face. We can see the brand of the beer you're holding. And more importantly, we've matched the metadata from the file to the GPS coordinates of your backyard. You can't use that. It's a violation of privacy. Gary's lawyer finally spoke up, but it was a weak, desperate move. In a public space or from navigable airspace, there is no expectation of privacy regarding illegal acts, Marla countered instantly. Especially when those acts involve the destruction of property and the violation of environmental laws. Marla leaned in. Mr. Sterling, you just committed felony perjury. You lied under oath about a material fact in a civil litigation. That is a crime punishable by up to 5 years in state prison. Gary looked like he was going to vomit. The accident had just become a crime. The volume guy had just been crushed by a single, high-definition data point. I think Gary's lawyer whispered, "We need to take a break." "No," Marla said, standing up. "We're done here. We'll see you in court for the summary judgment. And Arthur, give the district attorney's office a call. I think they'll be very interested in this footage."
I looked at Gary as I walked out. He was slumped in his chair, the weight of the system finally bearing down on him. The eye in the sky had seen everything, and the system was about to blink. Chapter 8, The Eye in the Sky. The fallout from the deposition was instantaneous and mechanical. In the cold justice philosophy, once the evidence is locked, you don't wait for the opponent to make it right. You activate the enforcers. By Thursday morning, I wasn't just talking to my lawyer. I was hosting a meeting in my driveway with 3 different agencies. First, there was Inspector Miller from Building and Safety. He brought a structural engineer with him this time.
They spent 20 minutes looking at the bowing retaining wall while I showed them the drone footage of the water discharge. The hydrostatic pressure from that discharge didn't just flood the garden, the engineer noted, pointing to a hairline crack in Gary's concrete pool deck. It undermined the loose fill he used for the footer. The whole deck is shifting. If we get another heavy rain, that pool is going to slide 6 inches into Mr. Vance's lot, taking the fence and the wall with it. Miller nodded, his face grim. I'm upgrading the notice of violation to a mandatory abatement order. He has 48 hours to drain the pool completely and submit a plan for professional demolition of the encroaching structures. If he doesn't, the city will hire a contractor to do it.
Next came the EPA representative. I had provided them with the water sample I'd taken during the flood. The chlorine levels were 3 times the legal limit for discharge into a storm drain. "Mr. Vance, this isn't just a neighbor dispute," the official said. "You've documented a willful violation of the Clean Water Act. The fines for this start at $5,000 per day of violation." Finally, there was the deputy district attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Jenkins.
She had viewed the deposition video and the drone footage. Mr. Sterling's lawyer is already trying to clarify his testimony, Jenkins told me, but the transcript is signed. He lied under oath to cover up a crime. That's perjury, plain and simple. We'll be filing charges by the end of the week.
I watched Gary through the fence. He was standing on his cracking deck, looking at the notice of violation Miller had just taped to his front door. He looked like a man watching his own funeral. The Trident attack was in full effect. His business reputation was being shredded as word of the EPA violation leaked to his commercial clients. The Lee's Pendens and the pending city liens were choking his credit, and he was facing actual prison time for perjury.
He saw me looking. He didn't scream this time. He just stared, his eyes hollow. He had tried to drown my garden, but the system was currently holding his head underwater. "Arthur," Gary called out, his voice cracking. "Can we just talk, man to man?"
"I'll pay for the maples. I'll fix the wall. Just..." Tell the DA it was a misunderstanding. Tell the city I'm cooperating. I stood my ground, my hands behind my back. I tried to talk to you man to man, Gary. On Tuesday at 3:15 p.m.
You told me to sue you if I was bored. I'm not bored anymore, Gary. I'm occupied. Please, he whispered. I'm going to lose everything. The business, the house. My wife is leaving, Arthur. She can't handle the criminal stuff.
The consequences of your actions are not my responsibility, I replied. I am simply the observer who recorded the data. The system is the one judging you. I turned and walked back into my house. In the cold justice manual, this is the point of no return. Forgiveness is a failure of logic. If I let him off now, he learns nothing. If I let the system finish its work, the neighborhood is safer. That night the rain started again. It was a soft, steady drizzle. I sat on my porch and watched Gary's pool. Because he was ordered to drain it, the weight was reduced, but the damage was already done. I could hear the faint, sickening CR-rack of the timber retaining wall finally giving way under the pressure of the saturated soil. A large section of his luxury deck crumbled, sliding 3 inches toward my lot. The fence groaned and tilted at a 45-degree angle. I didn't call him. I didn't rush out to help. I simply opened my laptop and added a new entry to the log. Incident log 2145. Structural failure of encroaching deck confirmed. Evidence of willful negligence mounting. Pacing toward final phase. Gary Sterling had tried to save $15,000 on a drainage system. It was now going to cost him everything he owned. Chapter 9, Perjury and Payouts. The courtroom was quiet, but the atmosphere was heavy with the smell of old paper and impending doom. Gary Sterling sat at the defense table, his expensive suit now looking a size too large. He wasn't the high-velocity narcissist anymore. He was a man who had finally realized that the rules applied to him. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Henderson, didn't waste time. She had already reviewed the summary judgment motion Marla had filed.
Mr. Sterling, Judge Henderson said, her voice echoing in the chamber, I have reviewed the drone footage. I have reviewed the deposition transcript where you swore, under oath, that you were not present during the discharge, and then I watched you, in 5K resolution, manually dragging that hose to the fence line. She looked over her glasses at Gary's lawyer. Does your client have any explanation for this discrepancy that doesn't involve the word miracle? Gary's lawyer cleared his throat. Your Honor, my client was under significant stress. He may have been confused about the timeline. Confusion is for grocery lists, counselor, the judge snapped. This is a court of law. Your client willfully lied to impede a civil litigation. He then used his own business resources to bypass municipal safety codes, endangering his neighbor's property and the local watershed. The judge turned to Marla. I am granting the motion for summary judgment on all counts. Liability is established. We will move immediately to the damages phase. Marla stood up. Your Honor, we are seeking $65,000 for the destruction of the heritage maples.
We are also seeking $45,000 for soil remediation and $30,000 for the demolition and restoration of the property line, as well as $50,000 in punitive damages for the willful nature of the act. And the perjury, the judge asked.
The district attorney has already filed formal charges, Your Honor. Sarah Jenkins, the DA, spoke up from the gallery. We are seeking a mandatory minimum sentence. Gary let out a small, choked sound. He looked at me, his eyes pleading.
I remained a gray rock. I didn't feel joy. I felt the satisfaction of a completed calculation. I am awarding the full amount of $190,000 to Mr. Vance, Judge Henderson declared, her gavel hitting the bench with a sound like a gunshot.
Furthermore, I am issuing a permanent injunction. Mr. Sterling, you are ordered to remove all encroaching structures within 30 days. If you do not, the city is authorized to seize the property for public safety abatement. As we walked out of the courtroom, Gary's wife was crying in the hallway.
Gary was being led away by 2 bailiffs to be processed for the perjury charge. He stopped as he passed me. You happy now, Arthur? He hissed, though the venom was gone, replaced by a hollow despair. You got your money. You got your trees. I'm going to jail.
My kids are going to see their dad in a jumpsuit because of some maples. No, Gary, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You're going to jail because you lied under oath. You're losing your money because you chose to violate my property rights. Your kids are seeing the result of their father's hubris. I'm just the man who owned the drone. Marla squeezed my arm. Let's go, Arthur. We have work to do. The Leons won't file themselves. Over the next month, the system moved with the relentless efficiency of a glacier. The EPA levied a $45,000 fine for the Clean Water Act violation. The city revoked Sterling Ecolandscaping's business license. The bank, seeing the $190,000 judgment and the criminal charges, called in Gary's business loans. Without a license, Gary's company collapsed in 3 weeks. Chapter 10, Scorched Earth. The final collapse of Gary Sterling didn't happen with a bang. It happened with a moving van and a quiet auction on the courthouse steps. Because of the $190,000 judgment and the $45,000 EPA fine, Gary couldn't afford to pay his mortgage. The bank foreclosed, but because of the lease pendens and the city's abatement order, the house wasn't worth much to traditional buyers. I, however, was not a traditional buyer. I used a portion of the settlement money to buy the judgment lien from the city. I then used my position as the primary creditor to force a partition sale. On a rainy Tuesday morning, I stood on the courthouse steps and bought Gary Sterling's lot for pennies on the dollar. I didn't want the house. I wanted the land. The day Gary had to move out, I was in my yard. I was overseeing the arrival of a massive flatbed truck. On the back were 4 mature, 25-year-old Japanese maples, each one a specimen of perfection. They weren't blood goods this time. I had upgraded to the rare aconitifolium. Gary came out of his house for the last time. He was carrying a single box. His wife had already left him, taking the kids to her mother's in another state. He looked like a ghost of the man who had stood on my porch and laughed at my mean letter.
He looked at the trees being lowered by a massive crane. Those must have cost a fortune, he said, his voice a flat monotone. $85,000 for the set, including the crane and the 5-year warranty, I said.
Paid for by your insurance company's liability payout and the liquidation of your landscaping equipment. Gary looked at the fence line. The old, encroaching fence was gone. In its place was a beautiful, reinforced concrete retaining wall faced with natural stone.
It was built 4 inches back from the property line, exactly where the law required it to be. You took everything, Arthur, Gary said. The house, the business, my family, all for some trees. No, Gary, I said.
I didn't take them. You threw them away. You gambled your life on the idea that I wouldn't fight back. You assumed that because I was quiet, I was weak. You were wrong. I'm just precise. Gary walked to his beat-up sedan. He didn't look back as he drove out of the cul-de-sac. I never saw him again. I heard later he spent 18 months in a minimum security facility for the perjury charge. When he got out, he moved to a different state to work as a laborer for a pool company. I spent the next year turning my yard and Gary's old lot into a single, unified heritage garden. I demolished his house and used the foundation to create a sunken meditation pool, one with a state-of-the-art, triple-redundant drainage system that exceeded city codes by 200%. The neighborhood is quiet now. The life is better at the pool t-shirts have been replaced by the rustle of maple leaves. I sat on my new back porch yesterday, sipping a cup of coffee. The aconitifoliums were turning a fiery gold as the autumn chill set in. My phone buzzed. It was a text from the new neighbor 3 houses down, a man named Brent who had recently installed a massive, unshielded floodlight that pointed directly into my bedroom window at night. Hey, Arthur, hope you like the light. Adds a little security, right? Don't worry about the glare, you'll get used to it. I didn't reply. I didn't get angry. I simply put down my coffee, walked into my office, and opened a new Excel spreadsheet. Incident log, day 1. Start time, 21:00. Subject, light trespass and nuisance violation. Antagonist state, overconfident. I reached for my phone and dialed Sela's Thorn. Sela's, it's Arthur. I need you to bring the light meter and the survey equipment. I think we're going to be marking territory again. The system is always there. You just have to know how to pull the lever. End of story.